It took just a few short hours for fire to rip through Grenfell Tower last June. 6 months on, the tower's charred remains still loom over this West London community. It's a daily reminder of the tragedy in which 71 people were killed. Even as the fire still raged, the local authorities came in for criticism. The rehousing of survivors has been a particular area of contention, with more than a third of the 300 families made homeless still in emergency accommodation.
Last year, Grenfell Tower seen one of the biggest tragedies we've seen in recent years. Tonight with us is Stephen Mackenzie, he is Fire and Emergency Planning, which will help us out to understand the tragedy and the fire itself. And of course, with us is Attiq. Malik is BME lawyer for Grenfell. And of course, we have with us Abdurahman Sayyid. He is the CEO of Islamic Center here. And we have Khadija Mamadou. Some of her families were the survivors from the Grenfell fire. First of all, I would like to ask you, Stephen Mackenzie, if you can, please explain to us how did the fire go on so rapidly in the building?
It's one of the dynamics we're trying to understand at this moment in time without having seen all the forensic fire investigation. We do know from the press feeds and the witness reports that there was a small fridge-based fire which went to a full fire development within the flat of origin. Normally that flat would contain the fire to allow firefighting operations. Unfortunately, in this instance, the firefighting crews believed they'd extinguished the fire in the flat, but unfortunately and tragically, it was within the cladding then. From that, we've had rapid fire spread on the external of the building and also potentially internally of the building, which prevented the occupants to evacuate, even with the assistance of the fire authorities.
Now, was it wise for the instructions being given to the residents to stay indoors rather than leave the building?
In most cases, in most flat fires, it is contained within the flat of origin. It's very rare for it to be a multi-flat fire. It does happen, and then the fire service response should actually escalate. This one has caught everyone out. And as Danny Cotton, the Chief Fire Officer to London Fire Brigade, stated, it's an unprecedented event which has not only involved Grenfell, but resulted in 284 other cladding systems now being failed in the UK. It's a huge problem.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to you a little bit more. So for us, Attiq, Malik, could you please explain your procedures in order to take on people to represent them, whether the victims or the survivors?
Well, the way it normally works with lawyers, barristers, etc., is they represent individual people in respect of whatever arena of law is operating at that time. So at this moment in time, there's no criminal arena or civil arena operating. It's simply the public inquiry. And that has limitations and time frames in itself. With ourselves, we're actually quite unique because the BME Lawyers for Grenfell, what we actually are is an activist group comprising of various activist organisations, lawyers from different disciplines, and local residents. And the purpose of our group is to supplement the legal process that's taking place. Think of it as a checks and balances. You know, we all have a cumulative experience of campaigning, grassroots experience, legal experience, and we have been challenging the public inquiry and the makeup of it from the outset.
Okay, we're going to come back to the public inquiry, and I'm going to come back to you a bit more. But let me turn to Abdurahman Sayyid, the CEO of Islamic Center here at Manar. How active your center was and still in with the survivors and the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. For us as a center, initially the whole issue was we thought it was going to be a temporary accident that would be controlled quickly, but it soon was clear for us that this would be something of a bigger tragedy than what we would have assumed. The response, it was not also something we would have negotiated or discussed, because it was a humanitarian disaster and we had a duty to respond to it. We had the space, and because it happened to be in Ramadan as well, normally we do have about 200 to 300 people breaking fast here. So we had the food supply, water, and dates. So we thought we can share this with the survivors of Grenfell Tower fire.
Okay.
And that's what we exactly did. We opened up our doors to anyone from Grenfell Tower, regardless of their ethnicity or faith or anything. They were welcome to come here and get the support that we can afford to offer at us.
We're going to come back to institutions like yourself and their services during the fire or after the fire. So let me move to Khadija Mahmoudou. Now, your family have experienced something which you would like to share with us tonight.
My family, luckily, and when I say this, those whose families didn't survive, I'm terribly sorry for your loss. But we were fortunate enough that my mum and my younger brother survived. Yeah.
So, how are you coping? How are they coping with such tragedy?
How are they coping? We're all human. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But people are coping. I think coping is the right word. People are coping as best as they can.
Okay. Now, I'm going to be taking questions from all of you, so I have to come back to you. So, Attiq, now, for you as a lawyer, there is some criticism of your, not only just your organizations, a lawyer as a whole. How do you take criticism from people saying that you're in there just because you're in it for the money?
Well, you see, this is the beauty of BME Lawyers for Grenfell, in that we don't actually represent anybody, so there is no money. The only reason we're involved as a grassroots organisation and a combination of activists and campaigners is for the cause. So there is no gravy train, which unfortunately cannot, the same cannot be said for a lot of people that are involved with the public inquiry. I mean, it's just a week or so ago we heard about KPMG getting caught up in a conflict of interest. I mean, seriously, you're going to do all the work and then find out later on that you're advising, the local council and sitting on a public inquiry. Is just absolutely ridiculous. But as far as the general stereotype is concerned about lawyers and only caring about money, that's a stereotype that exists. But the bottom line is this: public inquiries, the law generally, criminal law, civil law. It's a very technical minefield. And without the lawyers, how can you be guided through it? And I would like to believe that every lawyer that's out there who's representing individual members are doing it to the best of their ability to attain justice and accountability from those at fault.
Okay. Your centre, Manar Islamic Centre, was open. There are some criticism that the centre wasn't active from minute ago when the incident happened, when the tragedy happened. Can you clear that out?
It's the first time I'm hearing that kind of criticism, because the truth is we were here for the Taraweeh prayers until midnight, the night of the fire. And then from then onwards, like in the morning when we realized around 6 a.m. in the morning that this fire was going to last longer, then we kept our doors open, and since then we remained open to this day. I'm not sure if that criticism is correct, but definitely the center has been open and very welcoming as well. The services provided included initially the emergency services like clothes, toiletries, and then followed that by therapies like acupuncture, massage therapy, emotional support, and also legal advice by the North Kensington Law Center, and some others like the BME and other lawyers who came here to provide those kind of legal advice to the survivors. Then that was followed by a counseling service provided by a professional psychotherapist. And we thought people were still coming here traumatized and asking imams for prayers and support. And we thought alongside that we can provide a counseling support, which we've been doing since July now for the last 6 months, and it's going to continue, I think, for the next couple of years or more.
Okay, well, thanks for clearing that. But first, let's take a question from the brother there. Can you just state your name, please?
My name is Noordin Abu Diaj, and my question is to the BME lawyer for Grenfell. So what has the BME lawyers for Grenfell done to support and defend the people, or support them, since 80% of the people who passed away or are affected are from BME community, whereas there is no representation and nobody on the inquiry panel? So what have you done to achieve or to help people, especially that there is a petition also to get people on that panel?
Well, we've been campaigning from the outset and making as much noise as possible. We're also in the process of launching a judicial review in respect to that. And the bottom line is we're on the same page as that. We're not happy with the representation from the panel. We're not happy with the makeup of it. From the outset, there were housing issues, housing advice. I remember at one point, the local authority was giving out letters with certain wording on it, which we weren't happy with. And in that letter, they're offering a nominal amount of money in return for some housing benefits or some housing assistance.
So the council were offering money to people as
an incentive to sign a document to assist them to get housing. We were concerned that that document and the money they were assisting would form some sort of compensation when there was nowhere near that. So we assisted on the ground from the beginning there by writing to the local authority on behalf of various people, completely pro bono. But more importantly, the fight that's happening now is about the public inquiry. Because if we want justice and accountability, we cannot let there be a whitewash. We cannot let there be a situation where people who are just pro-establishment are stepping in and not looking at this from the perspective of the residents, from the perspective of the people that are affected. And that's our greatest concern. Are we going to really get justice here? And we need to ensure that we do the best we can.
Well, look, we're going to come a lot more to that, because the public inquiry has been and is one of the main focus in what's going on with the actual the Grenfell fire and the aftermath. Can you state your name and your question, please?
Jamal Francis Murray, and I'm just wanted to clear up something about the Amana Mosque. I think they did done a perfect job, because I was out there when the fire was raging and they were giving out water and all of those things there. So I just believe that there should be no criticisms aimed at them because of... So there should be no criticisms aimed at them because of they're just people who came and served the community that was in need. And really, they done their job. They done more. They went above and beyond and still have. And then my next question would be to say to you, are you dealing with just the tower block and the walkways, or are you dealing with the rest of the estate? Because I live on the other side of Lancaster West Estate. I was born in the tower, and I'm just saying, are you dealing with that side, or do you just deal with the tower and the walkways?
We're dealing with both, and the reason for that is because some of the people on our group are residents that live just outside the tower area. And the other concern that we have is this. We understand from early stage that the tower itself was full of asbestos. So at some point, that tower has to come down. When that tower comes down, what's going to happen to the residents in the surrounding areas? Are they going to start evacuating them? If they are, why is no one talking about that? There's so much going on. And as far as we're concerned, because we're not tied in to one organisation, and the organisation is made up of people from a diverse background of activism, legal organisations, etc., we're able to be more flexible. And we're out there supporting the cause on the ground wherever the assistance arises.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Sorry, one last thing. Well, you should come over to our side of the estate, because our side of the estate has got no representation whatsoever. We're not even involved in no conversations, really. Mm-hmm. And from our side of the estate, I can actually see the tower more than most of the others can. And I was born in that tower, so it's not cool for me at all.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And thank you for supporting the centre, because this criticism that we received in my research into doing this, that Al-Manar didn't do much, but I'm grateful that you have supported Al-Manar into the job that it's done. So we have another question here. Can you state your name, sir, and your question, please? I
am one of the volunteers facilitating trauma support after the fire. I have to echo what Ismail said as well about Al-Manar. They've been phenomenal since day one, because I was here since day one and I've seen what they've been doing. My question actually relates to something that Attiq mentioned in relation to housing, but I direct the question to Abdurahman and Khadija. Every month there's a meeting that happens called the Scrutiny Committee meeting. In December, that meeting focused on the health and well-being response. There was a report that was published that linked the perpetuation of the trauma that's being felt in the community with the delay in rehousing those who've been displaced, those who are ex-residents and survivors. So my question to those of you who are working on the front line, who are interfacing or either living that experience, in the case of Khadija and her family, is how is that trauma 7 months down the line manifesting itself and perpetuating, and what is being done from your perspective or not being done that needs to be done in order to help and continue to support and alleviate what's being experienced? Okay, thank you. Well, let's start with Attiq first. Well, we've been getting feedback on that on the ground for the last few months. And to be honest with you, some of the stories we've been hearing are truly heartbreaking. You know, people who've had reputations of being very staunch, strong people in the community, you know, they've had nervous breakdowns. You know, there's people with suicidal thoughts. And the reality is, where is the support for this? You know, you've got a local authority who's been criticised for looking down their nose at certain parts of this community, whereas other parts of the community where, you know, you've got slightly more affluent people, you know, they're getting a different level of treatment, a different level of service. So from the feedback we're getting on the ground is that not enough is being done, and actually no one's talking about it. No one's actually talking about the trauma and the ongoing post-traumatic stress disorder that people are suffering from. And that's a massive black hole too. Are they not talking about it because the government has, or the local authority haven't got the money or aren't prepared to spend it? You know, is it another angle that's being squashed? I don't know. But it's something that needs to be addressed. Okay. Let's move to Abdurahman.
I think the trauma issue is going to be something that will last, I think, longer. We realized this from day one. Initially, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, people had no clue what happened to their loved ones behind in the tower, and they were not getting any answers. So that was creating its own impact on people. The way we tried to manage it from our end was to organize what we call prayers in absence, so people can feel some comfort. And we organized that here in the masjid with our imams. And later on, when some bodies were recovered, we also organized the janaza prayers. Now, during those activities, we noticed the amount of emotional bereavement that people were going through. So that immediately led us to negotiate with the council to support us to set up a counseling service here that would have some kind of cultural and religious understanding of the community. So not to expect the community to go and seek that kind of support from the ordinary NHS-supported kind of service, but when they come here, we can offer that, and if there's any follow-up service needed for that individual or that group of people, then there could be a proper referral through a professional psychotherapist. And alhamdulillah, the council and the NHS have been supportive in that area. What we are now doing is, this was initially for just a year. We've been doing it for the last 6 months, since July. We're now negotiating with other community groups to look into beyond the first year. Because as everyone can tell, this issue has affected really not only the residents and the survivors, the entire community. I mean, people like us have also felt the impact of it simply by working and interacting with the people. So volunteers and school teachers, friends, everyone has been affected by it. So the counseling and especially addressing the trauma will have to be taken seriously. And this is where we are now, looking at the different community groups, the service they're providing, and also negotiating and trying to attract the council's support to initiate some kind of long-term trauma support, inshallah.
Okay, we have we're going to move from that question. We're going to move to something else. But first, before I get to the brother here, my question to Stephen: have we learned any lessons from this at all?
Yeah, but I think there are significant lessons learned about the local authority response. I've called it a civil contingency catastrophe. We were all here on the ground of the event breaking. It fell to the community. The local authority is charged under the Civil Contingencies Act to have robust response. And when I challenged the council at a December council meeting to make a public declaration, is your borough now fire safe and civil contingencies robust, they could not answer the question.
So what assurances does the council have at the moment in all the blocks that they have, in not just this council, other councils, but we're specifically talking about Kensington and Chelsea?
Well, Kensington and Chelsea attended a housing scrutiny meeting earlier on this week, and it became readily apparent their emergency audit of their fire risk assessments under the TMO, the new audit is defective. Therefore, when we took to the floor to give observation and recommendation, the responses we're receiving are lacklustre. Potentially the local authority needs to be placed again in special measures. There's concerns over the criminal inquiry, the public inquiry, the lack of community engagement. It's falling to too many professional individuals to assemble forums of professional experts to support the community and the wider stakeholder interest. We have got new cladding systems that have failed this week, so we may have another tranche of public concern, and it isn't being addressed.
Okay, thank you very much. So, with the brother here, what's your question, please?
My name is Abdullah Khalif. I'm a local resident of Kensington and Chelsea. I live in the Warrington estate. Ms. Khadija said she feels numbness. We feel the same numbness around the community, and we feel a sense of anger. My question is for Mr. Attiq regarding the legal things that we can do as a community to face the council, basically, because the council keeps ignoring us, neglecting us, the north of the borough. We want to know what are our rights and what should we do as a community, groups or community in general, to face this negligence. My second question for Mr. Steve.
Yes.
There are a lot of Grenfell towers around the area. There are a lot of health hazards, fire hazards, and we keep complaining to the council. We send them letters, we take pictures, we send them things, but there is no response. I mean, is it possible to push them somehow, or to get them to do something regarding the fire and the hazards that we face in our daily life? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Be brief, please, because we got just under a minute.
I understand. The challenges to the local authority on the status of their safety provisions has already occurred. I form the Grenfell Fire Forum. We're an independent panel of experts. We are challenging the local authority. We are challenging the government's response, the civil contingency response, the public inquiry. Rest assured, there is a large group of independent professional experts who are challenging all these things in not only Grenfell or Kensington, but the wider public safety interest. We've had buildings up and down the country being determined as unsafe, and the full national response is lacklustre and defective.
Thank you.
You've got it's a multi-pronged approach. We have to understand, for some reason, when you go to council offices as service users, they think that they're the boss. They're not. The council are there to serve you, the residents. You're the boss. You know, and for some reason, we have this master-servant gameplay going on with institutions and establishments where they think they're in charge when they're not. The real power rests with you. So you need to flex that power. And the way to flexing that power is in two ways. One is you need to get your lawyers on board, you need to get legal representations, write letters going forward, etc. Two, when they're not responding and they're letting you down, publicise it, get the media involved, humiliate them. For some reason, you tend to see that the establishment institutions, they respond quickly to PR than they do sometimes to, you know, just you personally speaking to him. And the other one, I mean, look what happened earlier on. When after a few days after the Grenfell Tower happened, everybody went down there for help and they closed the doors on people. You know, remember that hand coming up saying, you know, don't let them in. Well, go down there again. You know, it's your council, you're in charge. They're accountable to you. You pay your taxes, you know, you're the service user. Hold them to account.
So after the break, we will talk about the protest. Was it violent or non-violent? Because the council are claiming the protests that have been taken place at the time was not appropriate. Some people take advantage of the situation to do criminal damage to the properties of the council. See you after the break. Welcome back to this segment of the show where we're going to be discussing, as I mentioned earlier, the rehousing, the inquiry, and many more. For now, I want to talk first to Khadija and find out, priorly we talked about the tragedy and how your family are coping with such tragedy. Can you just tell us from their perspective, how they feel about the whole situation with the tragedy itself and the kind of support they're receiving?
Firstly, I'd like to thank Manar for the efforts and everything they did that night. I've heard they've come under scrutiny or whatever. I really don't understand why, but that's not from all of us. So thank you very much. I guess we're talking about trauma. But before we can actually discuss trauma properly, why don't we need to discuss getting these people out of the hotels. How can you be in a situation where your mind is constantly frazzled, where you're constantly waking up in cold sweats, where you're sharing a room with your children, or you know, you're sharing, it's not a house you're sharing a hotel room. And I think, and I know people haven't forgotten, but I need to remind people that there were children involved in this. My adopted brother has ADHD and autism, very clever boy, very respectful. Since they've been in the hotel, he's been very obnoxious, very naughty, very rude. He's not sleeping at night. My mum's not sleeping at night. I think most people are not sleeping at night. But then I think for me, one of the most upsetting things is when the council say that we've got, Mrs. Mahmoudi, we've got a place for you to go and look at. 6 places they've emailed her and us that they're gonna go show her. How many has she seen? 2. 3 of them she couldn't get into. The other 3, my brother could have just walked out of the house onto a building site next door. So they don't go and look at these places before they send them, they show it to you. They take you there. Half of the places mum couldn't get in. So they take you to these places, you're all excited, you're all happy, blah, blah, blah. You get there, and it's not safe for you. You get there, and it's on the 15th floor, or the 6th floor, or the 3rd floor. Who's gonna wanna move into another block of flats?
We're gonna come back to that in 1 minute. Thank you so much for that. Attiq, now, your firm is representing the survivors and the victims of the fire itself, right? Now, when the council issue a property to one of the survivors, does it go through you? Would it do it directly with them? How does it work?
Well, first of all, we don't represent, as a firm, anybody for the housing matters. As I said, we're an activist group of lawyers and activists. But as far as the process is concerned, the way it would work is, ordinarily, lawyers only get involved when there's something wrong. So what would happen is, the council would liaise with the prospective tenant on whether property is available. And if they got to a stage where they basically were not doing their job properly, then they would go to their lawyers to have their problem enforced. Is there a
pressure group somewhere that look after these people that didn't need help rather than them going around and making decisions?
Yes. Well, the community now has been organizing itself, getting together. There are now different residents associations as well as other community organizations. Ourselves, we sit on the Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Panel or committee, and through that we try to put pressure on the authorities to respond to the concerns raised by the one example we heard from Khadija and many others. So there is now continuous scrutiny. We also have been working with the media, the different media institutions have been doing a great job in terms of putting pressure on all the authorities, highlighting some of these issues, and I think that has been going on, and it will need to continue. Currently, there are now attempts to even to organize community-led research to identify the needs as well as the issues that is going on, so with some kind of tangible evidence that then can be used to face the authorities to show where there are areas to be addressed.
Well, thank you so much for that. If we look at the public inquiry itself, now the commissioner or the person being commissioned to run the inquiry, why so many people against him? Why so many people hated the fact that he's been nominated to do such a job?
Well, there's just two reasons. One is his track record. He's quite renowned for a case where he ordered that it was fine for, I think, Westminster Council, local authority, to rehouse somebody from central London over in Milton Keynes. Somebody who's lived here all their lives, and his position was at the time that the local authority doesn't need to give any reasons as to why they should go there. In particular, they don't need to give any reasons as to other housing options in the local area. Fortunately for that family, when the case got appealed to the Supreme Court, Lady Hale actually overturned that decision, and he's known for that. And the question that raises then is he somebody who will be more leading towards the establishment, or is he really going to have the needs of the residents in front of him? And the second reason why there is an issue is because this is an incident that's affected the public and the residents. But who chose him? What consultation took place with the affected people, with the people of Britain, with the taxpayers who are paying his bill, as to who should be leading this inquiry? Nobody did. You had, I think, the Chief Justice or Lord Chancellor recommending him to Theresa May, and he was put in place. There was no consultation, and it's being paid for by the taxpayers. What you need to understand is this is such a big tragedy that the government could appoint any judge, any lawyer, any barrister in the country. The creme de la creme of their legal fields are available. Everyone's ready to go. So why choose him?
But I'll come back to you, Stephen, on this.
Yes.
Now, people, the survivors, and they would never be satisfied almost with anyone. They always have something against that person. Anyone will have some kind of judgment that people are not happy with. How the government in a position to nominate someone to lead the inquiry, it bound to not many people will be happy with that.
There are ways to treat it, because we've got the precedents of after 13 years in Hillsborough, they eventually set up a panel which was legal experts, independents, religious leaders, etc. And that's the common comparator that's been held up against the Grenfell public inquiry. The Grenfell public inquiry, it's a multifaceted safety failure issue. But what the government's done in this case, instead of the Hillsborough single case failure, they've partitioned it. We've got testing task groups, we've got disaster recovery task groups, we've got the Attiq review, we've got the public inquiry, we've got the criminal investigation. So it's very hard in all the mechanics of this for the general public to have their true opinion put forward. And that's why it's fallen to BME lawyers or my own Grenfell Fire Forum to assemble a panel of experts, to engage with the community, and to, by accident, set up a diverse and inclusive panel of experts and community people to look at all of the government response and interact where we can with the public inquiry, the Attiq review and central government. But all too often, we're not invited to the table. So we have established the independent, diverse and inclusive forum, but we still can't get invited to the table despite repeated representations, and that's why we're joining forces with BME lawyers to submit for judicial review. As a forensic criminal investigator, it's defective, it should be abandoned, and we should have a better mechanism.
Okay.
Yeah, just very quickly, I mean, we purportedly live in a democracy, not a dictatorship. You know, this is something that has been affected, that affects people up and down the country. Grenfell is just one example. You know, we know that every community in England right now is concerned for their own safety and well-being. There's a pattern of behaviour that we've seen by local authority here, which isn't unique to this part of England. It's happening everywhere. And so, whilst you may not be able to please everybody, the whole dynamics of living in a democracy is that you listen to the people. You don't dictate to them and just do what you want.
Okay. Well, Abdurahman, now since your centre is playing a major role in what's going on with the Grenfell fire and the tragedy and the aftermath, have you been consulted in the appointment of the inquiry? Who's going to lead the inquiry?
No, definitely not. But what we did was we submitted a long letter to the Ministry of Justice in terms of representation, which was mentioned earlier, the need for the diversity and also the understanding of social housing and the community, the cultural diversity, all those kind of issues the panel should have taken into consideration and made sure that the people who sit in that panel represented or at least reflected that kind of diversity. Unfortunately, it did not happen, but at least on our side, we are still encouraging the Ministry of Justice and the inquiry team to be engaged with the community. We've offered also our space here for them to use as one of those facilities that they can use, not only to engage, but also to inform the community on the process and progress of the whole inquiry.
Okay, Khadija, surely the government will not go around everyone to ask everyone about the person who's going to be leading the inquiry. Obviously, as survivors of the tragedy, they are not approving of such person. How can you choose, how can you decide on which best person to run the inquiry?
I expected to get somebody fair, to get somebody who would look into this properly, considering the catastrophe that's happened, considering this is not just about Grenfell. There's other buildings that people go to sleep at night wondering if the same thing's going to happen to them. So forgive me for making an assumption, because I was quite naive about politics and all that. I just assumed we would get someone who was adequate, or, you know, who everyone, or who at least the lawyers would be involved with the selection or something. So honestly, I didn't think about that. I was more concerned about my family.
Okay. Thank you for that. We have a question here, sir.
Hi. Before the break, you touched on the issue of a contention has been raised about protests that have been occurring. Before I lead into that, I just wanted to make one correction regarding one of the panel members who's not here, Joe Delaney. Joe Delaney is not a councillor. He's a local resident who was evacuated. He's messaged me during this programme to ask me to clarify that. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Abdurahman, you mentioned that there's been a lot of community initiatives. And this is my point leading into my question about the protests. I'm saying this as someone who's not from the community. I'm an outsider who's observed the last 7 months. There has been a tremendous amount of community initiatives that have happened where the community have led the well-being and support of their own community, from Acklam Village, Niall sat here, the recently opened Latimer City, all of which has been self-funded, all of which has been led by the community, Kids on the Green, etc., etc. One of those initiatives that I've attended month in, month out is the Silent Walk, which is an emblem of this community, their nobility, their dignity, and how they manifest their quest for justice, the seeking of truth. So when you have that, and you have lanterns like Acklam Village and Kids on the Green and the Silent Walk, how does that reconcile itself with this apparent news about agitators who've been conducting protests. It just doesn't reconcile with this community.
One of the cases that we heard that the whole idea about the protest is to bring the government down. Any truth in that?
Okay, what you have to understand is, what is protest? In this country, we have a fundamental right of freedom of expression, of freedom of speech. Protest is one of many British values. If you look at the suffragettes, you look at a lot of historically, the great achievements that the people of Britain have achieved, it has been through protest. It's not illegal, it is your legal right. So there's nothing to be ashamed about. And what we often see is a situation where people don't like what they're hearing, they close their ears, they turn their backs. And if that doesn't anger somebody who's already extremely upset and traumatized by what's happened, and it leads to maybe a shout or two, there's nothing wrong with that. But why make a big deal out of it? Why is it when people from certain ethnic or religious or cultural backgrounds speak to people from establishment or institutions, they're told not to shout when they're not shouting? Why are people shut down? This is a form of censorship when you discourage people from expressing their freedoms and their rights of free speech.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to take a question from here. Can you please state your name and what's your question, sir?
Glad to see this work is going on. My name's Niles Hailstones. I've been based at what is now known as the Village in Ackland Village, Bay 56, since June the 14th. Now, that was a reclamation by the community, for the community to do for itself at a time when there was no response from the government, from the local authorities and all of this. Now, I'd say that the problem being that we're dealing with a historical issue. The local borough or the government has never cared about the people of North Kensington. And that's an historical fact. You can go back 150 years alone in this borough, and that is the fact of the battle. It's like the tale of two cities, right? Within this borough.
Sure.
So us expecting that culture to actually care about what happens to us is kind of naive if we understand what the history is, yeah? As a community, I'm a chair of two groups, One Voice Community Collective and Westway 23. Both of these groups have been challenging what has been going on in their area in terms of regeneration for the last 3-4 years in terms of the developments that's going on locally. So this battle was going on long before Grenfell happened. Grenfell is the pinnacle of that corporate land grab that's been going on, that has affected us on the level that it's affected on us. Sure. Because of the lack of due care. Now, I would say that justice takes many forms. The question I would like to ask, say even all of you on the panel really, because I think it's an important question at this time, is, what is justice? Justice for us in this society is kind of intangible because it's something we have never received in the society. So when people are talking about are we going to get justice from this situation, most of the people you talk to don't believe they're going to get justice in the sense of how justice is administered in the society that we live in. So to the panel, what does justice look like to you?
Okay, we're going to come back, we're going to answer that, but I'm going to ask you a question. You are a community activist. Do you think the community around Grenfell is united or divided?
I think it's a mixture of things, but I think that has also been caused by the dynamics of living in a war zone, because we are now living in a war zone that's comparable to any other part in the world. What happened in Haiti is similar to what's happening here. What happens in other places where buildings have been bombed. We were aware that we were under attack by corporate forces trying to drive us out of the area long before Grenfell. Yeah, and there's many ways to do that. It could be fire, it could be a decant policy. There's many different ways to get us out of the area, and that has been the agenda going back to the 90s.
Thank you, thank you for that.
Yeah, but the question I really want to get the answer to is that one, what does justice look like?
What kind of justice are we waiting for, we expect to get from this tragedy?
I mean, from this tragedy, we've got the public inquiry, criminal investigation, which informs the public inquiry, and the Hackett review. The government has been forced by Grenfell and 284 failures and counting that we've got a broken not fit for purpose building standards and fire safety regime, and it sent shockwaves around the world. We need to ensure that we have actions now, tonight, tomorrow, next week, next year, to protect the people in our society. The justice is we affect all the campaigns, checks, balances, and formal and informal representations through peaceful protest to affect the change to stop another Grenfell happening. I am not confident that we have got enough happening in a positive way. I think the situation's being managed, I think the situation's been manipulated, and I think we should abandon the current inquiry and recommence.
Okay. What kind of justice do you think they will get?
Justice, this is a question that's been asked from the beginning, and only a couple of days ago I had a text message from one of the residents asking the same thing. Justice, I'd say, is a few-step process. So there's milestones that need to be achieved, and each of those milestones being achieved is part of achieving justice. But it's only when we've achieved all the milestones that you've achieved justice. So the milestones will be, first of all, what is the truth? Let's get to the truth of what's happened. The people of Britain are sick and tired of hearing lies, a web of deceit. What is the actual truth of what really happened and the actual cause and effect of that? Who is really responsible? So first of all, the truth. Second is accountability. Who is going to be held accountable? And are the right people being held accountable? Once held accountable, are they going to be punished properly for their failures and the acts that have taken place? Then the next step is the change that comes from that, because the accountability and the truth should set in motion a process of change, deterring others from making those same mistakes, deterring or reducing the possibility of something like this ever happening again. And the final bit has to be recompense. There's no price you can put on someone's life being destroyed or taken away. You can't bring that back. But the government needs to recognise recompense. You've got undocumented survivors who are on the run, and the important witnesses, they need to be recompensed. The people who live there, the surrounding areas. I mean, we had a person here earlier on talk about surrounding areas. It's not just the people in that tower. People living around that area are also affected. Everyone needs to be recompensed by those at fault, and those at fault need to be punished.
Thank you very much. What kind of justice you expecting, Khadija?
I wouldn't say it's a case of expecting. I was just writing down my notes. For me, Justice, these are my points. 1, I believe that those involved should be made accountable. 2, acknowledgement of the errors and proven. So show us that you've learned something. Show us what you've learned. Show us your lessons. Show us the actions you've taken and the lessons that you've learned. 3, I believe mainstream media are culpable. I think they've been disrespectful and unfair to the bereaved and the survivors, which is what they did with the Hillsborough family up until recently, where they reported the truth. I think they should be held accountable as well for their actions.
Stephen,
yes.
The number of deaths, the 71, is it questionable or not?
I think, in my opinion, with the dynamics of Ramadan, a potentially unknown population within the building, those that are maybe concerned because they might not have permission to remain in the UK, who may have taken flight and went to ground. I don't know that 71 person is a true factor until I see all the forensic expertise information presented through the public inquiry. But the public inquiry is controlling the criminal inquiry and the dissemination of information that is very hard to grasp on what the true figure is. And we're getting different reports from the community that it's very difficult to identify how many. Now, if you look at the aftermath of that fire, most of the forensic evidence may have been destroyed in its entirety. And that is coming from a criminal investigator and someone that's quite knowledgeable. I don't know if it's a true figure.
Well, my very thanks to Stephen Mackenzie and Attiq Malik, Abdurahman Said, and Khadija Mahmoudou. We look forward to see you again another time. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.